Boo! Did I get you? There is no easier way to startle someone than by using a jump scare. A jump scare requires just a few steps to pull off. A quiet or anxious scene, a sudden abrupt change in an image or event, and usually a loud sting or sound effect to tie it all together. It's so easy, I could do it at any point in this video. So keep your guard up. The thing about jump scares is that they're so easy to produce that it's kind of hard to take them seriously anymore. Truly, if more than a couple jump scares appear in a horror film for me, I start losing interest. I've made a video about this concept before, my preference for quiet horror. In a jump scare fest, not only are the scares mostly surface level and short, but even if there is a good story underneath all that, I have no time to process it with all the explosions and violin screeches distracting me every 2 minutes. However, credit where credit is due, sometimes a jump scare serves a story well, if it's used effectively and in the right place. There is something uniquely frightening about being hit by imagery you had no way of preparing to see. However, looking back at our understanding of a full jump scare, there's something that usually dilutes the scare, and it's the sound. See, I think a lot of horror creators, mostly newer ones, don't have a lot of faith in their scares when they write or direct them, and want to do as much as they can to tip the scale from startling to scary, and it's in those moments where they shoot themselves in the foot. You know, I actually think a lot of jump scares would be wildly more effective if they were purely visual, and I don't think that's an uncommon feeling among horror fans and creators. Let me give you a fake example. Say we're watching a character walk through a dark, cluttered room, looking for maybe a key to get out. They're trapped, nervous, and can only use the light of their flickering flashlight to see anything. The setting holds many places for someone to hide, and under the cover of darkness, there's no telling what's moving around them. We hear a board creak. The protagonist spins around to look, the flashlight beam a blur in the dust. Nothing. They continue searching, and eventually, their light lands on an old armoire dresser. They reach out to open it. When the door opens, obscuring the camera until the full scene is on display, they see a whole person, crouched in there looking right at them, an inhuman look on their face. The character, horrified and stunned, takes a silent step back, processing their terror until it finally breaks, and they scream, and the action unfolds from there. Now, I'm not the one editing this video, so hopefully whatever visual you got for that scene served this idea, but either way, if you watch that scene play out in an actual movie, would that not be startling and effective? A reveal as it might actually occur in the real world, a sudden realization that you're in active danger, amped up by the strange circumstances of that revelation? Would that scene be better with a train horn? Would it be as immersive and powerful if there was a violent violin sting and a vine boom? I really don't think so. The reason I'm even thinking about silent scares in the first place is because I recently watched the postmodern slasher, and one thing that movie has figured out better than any other movie I've seen like that is how to make quiet scary. We watched the movie, for the most part, from the perspective of the killer, who would normally be our antagonist in a movie like this. It's clever. The movie is taking that slasher movie experience where the audience almost roots for the familiar antagonist rather than the dime a dozen protagonists, and it's amping it up by keeping our focus on the slow, methodical movement of the killer the whole time. The weird thing about this movie is, though there are scenes of murder and chaos and gore, for the most part, even the most intense scenes manage to be quiet to one degree or another. The kills in this movie are graphic, but happen in a way that victims rarely get the chance to scream or make any real noise, either by being killed so quickly or brutally that they don't even really experience their own murder fully, or, in a scene that makes your skin crawl, they've been paralyzed and simply have no way of responding to their impending death. These scenes are great, but my favorite scene is the one that takes place right at the end. Our final girl, whose name I can't remember and doesn't matter, has been rescued by a woman in a pickup truck. She's too traumatized to go over everything that has happened to her, and just claims to have been hurt in an animal attack. The woman doesn't push her on the issue and falls into talking about her own experience with animal attacks. The scene draws on for long enough that we start to tense up again, certain that the killer will pop up one more time, as is classic for slashers like these, but instead, eventually, The woman pulls over to treat our final girl's wounds, and we have this moment, quite literally not out of the woods yet, where the dread rises to a crescendo as we watch, along with the girl, a little stretch of wilderness where something is cracking through the leaves and branches. We're both, us and the girl, straining our eyes, listening intently. It's so quiet, but there might be something out there. With this level of atmosphere and attention, it would be easy to give us a heart attack, to have something leap out and scream with a dramatic cut to the credits. But that doesn't happen. Nothing emerges. If you haven't made it through the whole movie yourself, the way I'm describing this might not be the most impactful, but think about it this way. She's always going to be looking at those woods. Even if she moves far away, those sounds will stay with her always, as a form of trauma. The danger is gone, but the fear isn't. Usually we're frightened by the intensity of something. How is it possible to now be afraid of the intensity of nothing? Well, it's because nothing's really nothing. Silence is more than just the absence of sound, it's potential. The thing I like about jump scares is that they're unexpected. They have to be. If you knew they were coming, they wouldn't be scary, would they? Except that's not actually true, is it? Horror movies prep you for incoming jump scares by bringing down the volume and action in moments leading up to it, a sensation that both causes you to lean forward and pay more attention, and also to tense up, waiting for a shock. Sometimes a movie will do a fake out where the first thing that jumps out is something innocuous like a cat. The protagonist laughs at themselves for being startled by something so harmless, turns, and are met face to face with something truly horrific. It's a classic. So, let's think about this like we thought about the hypothetical I brought up in the intro. Does this setup, this tension-building moment or series of moments, still work if that final scare is silent? If not, what would need to change to make it work? To do this, let's look at a scene from a movie that's full of silent jump scares. It's the scene where Peter wakes up after breaking his nose. From the get-go of this scene, we already know something is wrong. The outside of the house is surrounded by naked figures, these strange cultists we've spent the movie becoming uncomfortably and yet barely familiar with. As we cut into Peter's room, we already know something is wrong, but we don't yet know exactly what that means. The camera holds a close focus on Peter as he wakes up and winces from the fresh pain of his nose. He glances outside and sees the light is on in the treehouse. We cut to a wide shot of the dark room and she's there, in the corner. Annie, Peter's mother. There's no sound, no sting, no nothing. I've met people in real life who actually didn't notice her in the scene until the very end. The scene lingers, Peter slowly getting up, confused, calling for his parents, and the whole time, she's just hanging there. We, as the audience, at least those of us who've noticed her by now, can't take our eyes off her. This was the first part of the jump scare. Noticing that she's there is startling, not because a boom has told us so, but because we realize there's a very real world where we didn't notice she was there, just like Peter doesn't. We're startled by how stealthy this scare is, almost like we had to seek it out. It's scary how much potential it has. Is she going to jump down at him? Will he notice her? Why is she there, and what is she about to do? The scene continues on, cutting briefly to another shot of the treehouse, and for a second, I think a lot of us expect her to either be gone or right behind Peter when it cuts back. But she isn't. She's still there, in the corner, unmoving. Peter seems to know something is wrong, and he slowly turns to look at the place where Annie hangs, when suddenly we see her almost swimming in the air behind Peter, avoiding his line of sight, still silent. This is the second part of the jump scare. The motion is so active, so unmistakably Annie, and horrifying in a surreal and nonsensical way. We're seeing our antagonist in action, and our protagonist doesn't even know. Presenting the scene by itself makes it scary, but I shouldn't have to be the one to tell you that scenes like these are made even scarier if you do the work beforehand. Our experience with the rest of the film informs us that this isn't just some woman being creepy. This is Annie Graham. She's a character that we've grown to distrust, who we've seen multiple times, especially as the plot has become more intense, is less than capable of keeping control over herself. We know she almost killed Peter once while sleepwalking. How do we even classify the state she's in now? And the best part is only we get to see it. Peter has no idea. Not yet, at least. Now, imagine this scene if instead of quiet eeriness, there was a violent violin squeal and impact sound effect. First of all, it would gut the remaining atmosphere of the scene. We've been told by the sound design that we're suddenly in an intense situation. Our body is now reacting to input that the other characters on screen did not experience, and we're now disconnected from our narrative. Even if Peter had been able to hear the jump scare sound effect and react to it by running or screaming or whatever, that would prevent the following scenes where Peter does become aware of the horror around him from having any real impact. It's so much more gratifying to watch Peter become aware of Annie's antics only when she allows him to, by becoming loud and violent. But this gratification only works because, like I said, the filmmakers have done their work. It's fun knowing more than your protagonist. We tend to call it dramatic irony in the business. The information we have access to surpasses that which our character of focus does. It's like watching a slasher movie during the first 30 to 45 minutes. Everyone's all separated and having sex and smoking pot and stuff. You know, evil shit. The excuse the movie gives for you to feel okay about watching them die. When the first couple victims start getting killed, most of the time they don't even realize they're in danger until it's too late. Scenes like that, where we're aware there's a violent killer but the character doesn't, are what lead to those fun moments where you're yelling, "Don't open that door!" at your TV. In the realm of silent jump scares though, it's a little different. Less active. One trick a lot of movies like playing that I particularly enjoy is showing something or someone behind or out of sight of the character our scene revolves around, a scare that only exists for the audience. Now, of course, if there's no reason for the horrifying object to be there other than for our sake, that can come across as cheesy, but it's possible to do it intelligently. One of the sloppier but more popular versions of this scare happens a lot in the film The Strangers. Let's look at arguably the most famous scene. One of our two protagonists, a woman named Kristen, is alone in the house where the movie takes place, waiting for her partner to come back from somewhere. I think he went to the store for cigarettes. She's doing some casual, non-specific stuff in the kitchen, not paying attention to the rest of the room, when from the dark doorway behind her, a masked man silently emerges. It's a little frightening, but it almost becomes funny as he stands there, shifting his weight and taking the occasional small step forward. And the whole time, Kristen doesn't turn around. The man isn't hiding himself at all. This isn't Annie in the corner. If Kristen turned around quickly enough, she'd almost certainly see him, at least in the real world, but the thing is, she just doesn't. Despite what you might be thinking, it's not a stupid choice. In fact, it's hardly a choice at all. Sure, she had a strange encounter at the front door earlier, but we're still early enough into this movie that her not being in panic mode yet is totally reasonable. Like I said, the intruder is being completely silent, and it's kind of funny how much he's banking on Kristen staying pointed in one direction, but on the other hand, maybe he's just waiting to strike till he's seen. At this point in the movie, we have no way of knowing. Kristen not noticing the person behind her is frustrating to the audience, but fully realistic. How many times have you gotten lost in a task in what you believe to be a safe space? Casually spreading butter on toast, or doing the dishes, or just getting a glass of water? Hell, what about right now? Watching this video. For a brief moment, your attention is fully on what you're doing, on the process of washing and drying, or keeping your glass steady under a stream, or just whatever. It would be so easy to sneak up on you at that point. Or, as this intruder does, just vaguely hang around for a second and then disappear for horror movie reasons. For all the iconic shots and moments in The Strangers, it does get a little lost in its horror movie-isms. A lot of the scares seem more for the sake of the audience than the actual characters, leading to plenty of moments where you're questioning the logic and motives of our antagonists. The first time you're watching behind her, that's interesting and scary, but the second and third and fourth and fifth time you're doing it, I just start questioning, do you have anything more than that to do here? And yes, they do. It's murder. That's kind of what happens in all the Strangers movies. However, in something like Mike Flanagan's where more often than not you're questioning the motives of your protagonists over the antagonists, the strange, quiet ways that the show scares you, on top of its more bombastic and classic jump scares, are wildly effective. See, the primary difference between the scares in Hill House and the scares in The Strangers is that in The Strangers, each scare is separate, intentional, and pretty hard to miss, as well as coming from living human characters who we expect to more consistently follow logic and physics. But in Hill House, not only are most of the scares related to ghosts, which are just more flexible in their behavior as characters, but scares build on themselves, almost like creating an atmosphere of jump scare without actually doing it. Let me explain. In every episode of the series, there are multiple ghosts hidden throughout the scenes. Some of them are more noticeable than others, but by the end of the show, you'll probably have actively noticed at least a few of them. I'd be willing to bet, though, especially on their first watch through, that very few people actually catch all of them. And it's crazy. If you go online and look at a list of all the ghosts that appear, especially ones that include screen grabs of all their appearances, you might be shocked to realize how out in the open a lot of them are, how hard they should be to miss. But quite like Kristen in the beginning of The Strangers, we're simply not expecting them. Not at first, but once you catch that first ghost, that first one that no one in the story references or notices themselves, the mood changes. Suddenly, you're aware that even in the non-horror scenes, there might actually be horror, not just hidden in the background, but out in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. Tying this viewing experience to the actual narrative of the show, which at several points throws up the dramatic question, is this supernatural or psychological, you start to understand the spiral into madness many of the characters approach by the end of the show. The inability to trust what they're seeing, what they believe in, themselves and the people around them. It's like when you're waiting for a jump scare, but instead of it being an actual jump scare, it's just a particularly unsettling thought. You're afraid of reality, but more accurately, you're afraid of your own experience of it, which is why so many of the characters in the show bludgeon themselves into numbness through drugs, alcohol, work, and straight-up denial. Belief and expectation are two key components to making a scene or situation scary. Your beliefs are what tell you what is and isn't possible in any given situation, and those possibilities inform your expectations. For a non-spiritual person, ghosts or demons don't exist, and therefore, no one with that set of beliefs ever enters a situation expecting to see those entities. We see this from the character of Steve in the show. He experienced only the human terrors of living in Hill House as a child. The loss of his mother, the changing of his family members' personalities and mental states, and the breaking up of said family, but not a ghost. So, despite being a prominent paranormal investigator and author, he's pretty unwilling to acknowledge real supernatural horrors around him, which just makes things worse. It's one thing to be frightened by the specter of your dead sister. It's a whole other thing to try to convince yourself that apparition's appearance is a sign of mental illness. Steve tortures himself with his beliefs, as do pretty much all the surviving members of the family, and this is wildly exacerbated by being constantly on edge about the surreal ghostly atmosphere that is attached to the house. So, bringing all that back to those encounters, where you suddenly and accidentally pick a character out of the setting who shouldn't be there, it's scary not just because it's unexpected, but because for a second, you're briefly just as crazy as anyone else who makes the mistake of living in Hill House. While we're on the subject of belief, there's a great, very quick silent jump scare that appears in the movie. And it's also arguably one of the most iconic horror images of all time. How does it tie into belief? Well, this movie is called The Exorcist, so take a wild guess. This movie, which was adapted from a book by William Peter Blatty, is not as much about Reagan, the possessed little girl, as it is about her mother and a man named Father Karras. Father Karras. I'm gonna say Karras. Both of the characters have a complicated relationship with religion. Chris, Reagan's mother, is atheist and therefore hasn't exposed her daughter to any religion. Meanwhile, Father Karras is deeply involved in religion, but is struggling with it, mostly in the face of dealing with his mother. Karras' mother is elderly and sick, something he'd have an easier time dealing with if not for his vow of poverty, which relinquishes his claim to material possessions and wealth. It's a church thing. He's frustrated. If he had chosen a different path in life, one that provided him with more tangible rewards, he might have been able to put his mother in better housing, spend more time with her, and simply feel more satisfied than he does now. However, by this point, he's too deep in, and his mother's too far gone. She dies not too long after we're introduced to her in the story, scared and alone in an institution. The little silent jump scare that we're talking about here is tied closely to these feelings of shame, regret, and loss that Karras feels during the story, both towards his mother, who he feels he has failed, but equally to himself, and maybe even God. Karras is lost and untethered, his faith no longer serving or comforting him, and so he has a nightmare. His mother is emerging from a subway station. She's clearly calling out to him. We can see the shapes of her lips forming the words Dimmy, her nickname for her son, but no voice emerges. Father Karras, across the street and too far to reach her, shouts for her and beckons for her, but she does not come to him. Karras watches as his confused mother returns to the depths, descending into a metaphorical version of her death, of hell. He's losing her all over again, but once again, he's too removed. He's incapable, and as this guilt and shame and dread builds up, him desperately trying to reach her, just for a moment, a face appears on screen. It is white and shadowed and sharp and horrible, the face of a demon. There's no official cue for it. It's just there, then gone. A simple representation, guilt made manifest, this demon, Pazuzu, already with its claws in Karras' psyche. The scare works well because not only is the face itself disturbing, especially with no warning, but because we know that it's more than a face. It's not just a demon either. It's an accusation. Karras has let go of his two lifelines, his family and his God. All he's left with is his sin, his lack of faith, and his failures. Demons are tormentors by definition, and what torment could be greater than constantly having to relive failing those who you care about? The little flash of Pazuzu scares us, but it also informs us. Our hero is one on the precipice. What do all these scenes have in common? None of them exist in a vacuum. I hope that the examples I've chosen have made this point clear by themselves, but if not, I'll elaborate. The reason a regular jump scare works is because of our fight or flight response. A jump scare immediately presents us with intense perceived danger and triggers a natural survival response in us. We jump because we're either getting ready to throw a punch or to leap off the couch and away from danger. It's for this reason that you can do a jump scare at literally any time. But the silent jump scare requires more planning. It requires context, for your audience to have been at least mostly paying attention. A visual that's startling enough by itself, it doesn't require a sound cue. And I think any creator who's willing to give their own work that level of attention, regardless of whether or not that silent jump scare itself works, is destined to end up with a better final product than someone who's just not. The silent jump scare isn't going to work in every situation. Some horror movies aren't trying to scare you with imagery at all. Others are written to be so bombastic and graphic that it would be kind of impossible to create the atmosphere necessary to use one effectively. And that's fine. It's an understandable mistake to try to shove every trope and trick into your movie to make it as scary as possible, and it happens a lot with newer creators. The point of this video isn't to convince creators that all their jump scares or horror projects need to be quiet and measured. Rather, it's to simply show those who hadn't considered it that there's more than one way to make someone's heart rate spike. If you do the work beforehand, that is.